Hello, everyone. Today we have a special guest, Dr. Bastiaan Willems, Postdoctoral Fellow of Modern European History at the University College London, who recently published his book, Violence and Defeat, the Wehrmacht on German Soil.
Thank you for having me, Bernard.
Thank you for joining us. And today we will look at the question, why did the initial attack on Königsberg fail in January? Basically, from what I know from you, the Red Army command, the Stafke, gave the order that Königsberg should be taken around in January 1945. But this was not fulfilled. And when the Red Army arrived at Königsberg, they initially tried to take the city immediately, but they failed, and then there came a siege which lasted until about 9th of April 1945. So how did the Wehrmacht basically defend initially at this point, and then why did the siege last so long?
Yeah, so what happens, and you already pointed this out a little bit, but just to reiterate, it's like on the 13th of January 1945, the Red Army starts its offensive into northern East Prussia, and Königsberg is the biggest city of East Prussia, its capital, and as such, it's been designated a fortress earlier that previous year, and has been built out as a fortress since like for a few months at that point. What is important about Fortress Königsberg is different to earlier fortresses in the Soviet Union. It lies quite far behind the front line. In the Soviet Union, most Festungen, as they're called, most fortresses, they are within 20 kilometers, 30 kilometers, so 20 miles, give or take, behind the front line. So basically, they can be encircled by the first wave, if you will, of a Soviet attack, so of a main Soviet attack. So Operation Bagration in the summer of 1944 is the main example of this, of course, where you see that so many German fortresses are just immediately encircled, and as a result, they are defeated without much problems. Now, what happens with German fortresses? They lie much further to the rear, which means that the initial force of any Soviet attack is already cushioned by the initial lines of defense of German defense. And that is exactly what you're seeing in Königsberg and in East Prussia. So first, the Red Army has to battle itself through line after line after line, German defensive position, before they even reach Königsberg. So it is fighting for 2 weeks before it even reaches Königsberg. So this changes what the fortress is tremendously, really, because what happens now, contrary to like half a year before in like Belarus, like during Bagration, what happens is that now the Soviet armies have run out of steam a little bit. Like tank losses at this point, by the time they reach Königsberg, are spectacularly high. So you have armored corps, like Soviet armored corps, they start in mid-January 1945 with over 200 tanks, for example, and by the time they reach Königsberg, like this number is already down to 40, or sometimes even lower. So instead of facing 200 tanks, you're now facing less than 40. So you can understand the massive difference this makes in the defensibility of a city. So if you have 40 tanks, you have to be, as a Soviet commander, you have to be more careful than you have to be than when you have 200 tanks. Like you cannot go in with the same force as that you would have wanted. This is what is happening in Königsberg. So by the time the Red Army reaches the gates of Königsberg, they are already fighting for 2 weeks, and they start to be also at the end of their strength. Now, in Königsberg, because it's been built out as a city, they will now meet its security garrison. The security garrison are actually, let's say, they are units of like so-so quality. Like they're not like the best units, but they are there. They are trained for their roles. So like they defend, for example, the forts that surround Königsberg. Like these are forts from the old Prussian time. They are still made of big masonry, of thick bricks. So they are at least good enough to withstand initial defense and Soviet artillery shelling. So like these are men that are in these forts that like defended there. Then of course there's the Volkssturm. So there's roughly 10,000 men of Volkssturm, which also take the Soviet attackers quite by surprise. Like they didn't expect to be halted by units they didn't expect there. So they approach Königsberg from the east, like most cities are, of course, approached from the east if you're like the Soviets, because they come from the east. So as a result, and in the east, Königsberg is being defended by Volkssturm units and by subpar units, and the Red Army really doesn't know what to do with that per se. They don't know what the strength is of these men. They only know that they are fighting very fiercely, and as a result, they decide to encircle Königsberg and perhaps try to encircle it completely and then enter via the west. By this time, and it is really like in the course of like a day and a half, 2 days, some initial reinforcements start to arrive in Königsberg. It's not much, but it's important reinforcements. It's a number of Sturmgeschütze, so self-propelled artillery, who arrives in the north of the city, which also again like knocks out a few tanks, Soviet tanks. So by the time they complete their initial encirclement, they are down to roughly 25 tanks, and that is completely insufficient to capture a city. So at this point, the choice is being made, rather than attacking it full on, what we do is we just encircle it. Also, the Red Army troops are at this point are exhausted, and especially the units of the army encircling it, which is the 39th Army of one of the most important Soviet generals, Lyudnikov. Lyudnikov has been fighting at Stalingrad, is really highly experienced, a very good commander. He makes the call, we're not going to take this city. It would be a hopeless endeavor. He communicates this with his fortress commander, Chernikovsky, of the 3rd Belarusian Front, and with his colleague just a little bit further in the south, because also from the south they're trying to encircle the city. Lyudnikov does it from the north. South, you have Galitsky, the 11th Guards Army. So these two men basically say, we are at our end of our strengths. We cannot capture the city. We've been fighting for 2 weeks. We have been sustaining heavy casualties. We cannot enter the city. We just do not have the strength. And Chernikovsky agrees with this assessment and decides to encircle the city.
So in a way, you have now the situation that the Germans have a very short logistical line, especially since Königsberg was a major logistical hub for the German army in East Prussia, or general in the east, and the Soviets run out of steam. And I think you mentioned in another video to me that Königsberg actually, since they have repair facilities and everything, now the number of tanks that increase over time. So basically the Soviet strength increases over time a bit, but also the German troops get stronger over time. Is this correct?
Yeah, so what happens is two important divisions manage to retreat back into the city. The first is the 1st Infantry Division. This is a division that is actually completely mustered in East Prussia. So they are, in fact, defending their home soil. And there is the quite famous 5th Panzer Division, which also has been fighting since the 13th of April, almost continuously, and also falls back into the city. Well, the 5th Panzer Division, of course, has suffered very high numbers of tank losses. But in Königsberg, there is a tank repair depot, and they are finding spare parts basically everywhere. Like they refer to this to the city as a Wundertüte, a grab bag. So like let's see what we can find if we just look very carefully. And they find a lot of stuff basically lying around everywhere in the city, if you will. And this is all being brought to like a central point, to a tank repair depot. And this tank repair depot restores over 1 tank per day. And this is all with civilian labor, basically. So you're not even sapping your own military strength. So even though in the first days of the siege, the 5th Panzer Army is fighting very hard and is suffering casualty numbers, as long as you manage to drag your tank back to the repair depot, which is what normally happens, they can be restored. So after 2 weeks of fighting, the number of tanks in this division and another unit as well, it's up to 80 tanks, which is a very high number at this stage of the war, at this theater. And like this becomes sort of like the basis for the defense of Königsberg for a few days. And the same holds true for the 1st Infantry Division. Like also this division has been fighting since the first day of the East Prussian offensive, has been suffering tremendous casualties, but in Königsberg finds that it can start to train, and then train you can really within inverted commas, little boys, 15, 16-year-old, but these boys are completely like indoctrinated, of course, like they grew up under the Nazi rule, haven't known anything else but Nazi propaganda. So these are really, truly committed fighters, and the veterans of these divisions, they use this sort of like this boyish naivety and the willingness to prove themselves to their full potential. So these young boys, 15, 16, 17 years old, they become now frontline soldiers, and they form the first wave of attack once they have to break out of Königsberg. And they suffer very high casualty numbers. And this is, like these boys are basically just civilians. Some of them didn't even fit their helmets. So they have to be given like standard caps. Like this is the only thing that fits. This is no problem at all to Eastern Front veterans. They feel completely that this is within their rights, like Germany has to be defended. And they use these boys as basically as cannon fodder. But what it does, and this is for the veterans most important, is that it keeps the core of veterans intact. So if you attack, but at the end of your attack, your main officers, your main NCOs are still alive and doing well, like that is obviously the most important. And that one of the new recruits has died, that is of a much lesser concern to you. And that is why Königsberg is so important to these units. And this is also why it managed to hold out for the time it is.
So, well, not much to add here from my side. Now, if you have any questions about Königsberg or East Prussia or in the late war fighting there, please put your comments or your questions down in the comments, and we might do a follow-up or several follow-up videos if you like. And big thank you here, Bastiaan.
You're very welcome. I really enjoyed it.
Excellent. So thank you for watching and see you next time. Bye.